Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and welcome to episode 39 of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. Today, it is my distinct privilege and pleasure to have Marie Patterson from Hyperos to visit with me. The reason I asked Marie to come on to the podcast was she was a part of a conversation or an interview in Compliance Week magazine that came out, and it talked about third parties, how you manage your third-party portfolio in a compliance regime, and some of the technological tools that are available through her company Hyperos and to help manage that process. And I thought that that would be something that many compliance practitioners would probably be interested in. So with that, welcome, Marie.
Thank you very much. Hi, Tom. How are you?
Good, good. I've had a chance to visit with you before, and I do understand that you did not start out in the compliance industry. Can you tell us what your current role is at Hyperos and how you got there?
Yeah, sure. So I have the privilege of being the head of marketing. I'm the VP of marketing here at Hyperos. I came to this role ultimately as a result of working in the software industry for more years than I care to own up to, and most recently in the market that ended up being the whole e-discovery market. So going back to the early 2000s, post Enron and corporate malfeasance, we saw a number of technology companies looking at this whole area of e-discovery, primarily around electronic records, and our company was a big part of that. And really this nexus of technology intersecting with law, which I found fascinating, which obviously has some relevance to what I'm doing today at Hyperos.
Now, I'm sitting here in Houston, Texas. You sound like you're a little east of us here in Houston. Where are you today, but more importantly, where are you from?
Sure. So I'm based in New Jersey. Hyperos has offices all over the U.S. We're also we're a global company. But as some of you might be able to tell from my accent, I didn't start out on this side of the Atlantic. I spent many years living in the UK, which would explain my rather non-traditional American accent.
Indeed, indeed. So anyway, one of the things that I've learned about you and your company and the process you all have is it really helps companies managing their third parties. And I think most compliance practitioners understand that third parties present your greatest risk in an anti-corruption law such as the U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act or the U.K. Bribery Act. Can you tell us how would you suggest a company or a compliance practitioner go about defining a third party and begin to try to get their arms around managing that relationship?
Sure. Be delighted to. So I think the first thing to think about is who or what is a third party? And thinking outside of just all things to do with anti-corruption, just in general as a business, as far as we're concerned, as far as our customers are concerned, a third party is pretty much anyone who's not an employee. So a third party may include your suppliers, vendors, contract manufacturers, all of those companies that form part of your supply chain, as well as anyone on the distribution side, your channel partners, distributors, joint ventures, as well as contractors. In our customers' case, this is a very broad range of entities, and as we look at our customers, tends to account for somewhere in the region of 60%. In some of our customers, it's less than that. In many of our customers, it's greater than that. But at least 60% of the value of their organization, usually by revenue. So that's the first way of really looking at who or what are my third parties.
So it sounds like that you guys advocate a company really looking at more than just third parties on the sales side. It's a much more comprehensive review and a much more comprehensive management process.
Totally. And the reason we do that is, again, just thinking about how our customers are managing third parties and why they want to manage third parties. The vast majority of our customers are concerned about the broad risk associated with third parties, as well as the value and performance of those third parties. So without picking on any particular organization that's been in the press in 2014, if you think about some of the more highly publicized stories associated with a failure, a risk failure to do with a third party, in most cases, those aren't what would typically be considered to be a high-risk third party. So, for instance, your HVAC vendor, it turns out, is the way in which a major data breach has happened in your retailing organization. Well, at face value, and as a company maybe traditionally has looked at third parties and how to manage that, you wouldn't typically be thinking about an HVAC vendor as presenting a high risk. So from our perspective, from our customer's perspective, it's important at the outset to think about any organization that forms part of your third party entire ecosystem, and then from that decide, okay, depending on lots of different factors, how should those third parties be managed?
You know, I'm really glad you gave that example because obviously I play in the FCPA, anti-corruption and anti-bribery space, and we tend to focus on corruption risks. But the example you gave, I think most people are extraordinarily aware now of corporate vulnerabilities through avenues that we had never considered before. So to have a small-ish vendor open a door to a company-wide database, or indeed multi-million people's personal information, I think, has opened the eyes of a lot of America to what risk really is, and it's not simply a risk about the breach of a law, it's a risk of a wide variety of factors.
Absolutely, and it's much broader than just looking at this in terms of a technology breach. You know, on the face of it, this is a data breach. But once we start to actually look under the covers, there's more than just, your IT security team that should be concerned right now. So more and more, our customers who potentially initially looked at a small subsection of their third parties, so maybe they're using Hypero specifically to manage their FCPA or broader anti-corruption risk, and that's forming a subset of their third-party entities, are saying what would be far more intelligent would be to have a consistent manner in which we register and onboard all of our third parties across our organization, particularly for large organizations that may be extremely distributed, and where there are concerns that, for instance, the team in Asia Pacific is looking at the onboarding and maybe the initial due diligence of a third party in a very different manner from the team in the Americas. It would be more intelligent, not to mention probably far more cost efficient to have a consistent manner of collecting that initial information up front, of doing that onboarding, and that will then determine how that third party needs to be managed and how you're going to manage them around all kinds of issues. Again, bribery and corruption being just one of the risk factors that you need to look at.
Wow, you really said a lot there. So let me see if I could break down some of that answer, because the way you explained it, if I'm a chief risk officer or a chief legal officer or even a chief compliance officer, I may just be overwhelmed now with the types of third parties that I have to look at, because I thought I was really only looking at a small group of people that help us on our sales side, but I hear you advocating a much broader scope. How does someone start just to get a handle around what they need to do?
So that's a good question. If we have a look at the reason that I'm advocating that, again, this is based on what our customers are doing. So our best practices have been developed as a direct result of working with primarily Fortune 500 organizations. The challenge that those organizations run into is that third parties traditionally have been siloed. So your procurement organization is looking after maybe just your indirect spend. And your sales organization is looking at another group of third parties, your marketing group, your IT, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And each of those organizations have ended up maybe developing their own systems. Some of those systems may have technology behind them. Some of them will be manual. So even looking at something as simple as how do I pay those third parties? Even something as simple as that, we find that, or apparently as simple as that, one of the things that our customers tell us is that again and again and again, we run into difficulties where a third party isn't in our system. And then lo and behold, I'm receiving an invoice out of nowhere, and the third party doesn't exist. Or the same third party exists in multiple systems, yet the information I have on that third party is different in our multiple systems. So, I have 7 ERP systems, and 10,000 of my third parties are reflected slightly differently across each of those systems. So from purely a day-to-day transactional perspective, this gets extremely complex. But going back to the question that I think you asked me, which is from the compliance executive's perspective, why should I be looking at something broader than maybe an initial group of third parties who I understand could subject me to broad risk? The answer is, going back to the case I just mentioned, how can you be confident that you have actually identified the third parties that could subject you to risk in this slightly manufactured view of what high risk means? And so the practice that we're seeing more and more of our customers move to is that I effectively would like to put a standard front door at my organization for all third parties to go to, and in a very consistent manner, I'm going to be collecting some information that's germane to all of those third parties.
Right.
And depending on, again, as I said at the beginning, lots of different factors around that third party, what business they're doing with us, it might be to do with spend, where in the world, et cetera, how many contracts I have with them. That will ultimately determine where and how they're going to be managed. But that initial onboarding, we find, if done in a consistent manner, can save an organization a lot of headaches downstream.
Is that the onboarding process something Hyperos can help advise on, in addition to delivering a technological solution which helps facilitate that?
Absolutely. So from an advisory perspective, Hyperos is a technology company, and the Hyperos platform is a third-party management platform. So our advisory is very much in the form of what are other customers like you doing. And so as we look at different industries, for instance, be it, we have a lot of customers in financial services and banking, or in technology or manufacturing or whatever it happens to be, we're able to bring to bear the experience of other customers so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel each time.
In the Compliance Week interview, there were a couple of terms I had not seen frequently used, and I want to ask you about these. And these were the questions that Carol Switzer posed. The first one was, how should a company identify and monitor internal parties to a third-party relationship? What are internal parties to a third-party relationship?
So the internal parties, as we look at them, are within an organization, again, thinking about a corporation. They're going to be multiple entities, different departments that need to, at some stage, to interact with that third party. So let's, for instance, Hyperos as a corporation, we want to do business with Tom Fox. Okay? And I'm the head of marketing. I want to engage you, Tom, to do some work with me. So I know who you are. We've emailed, we've chatted. I have all of your contact details. But there are others in the organization that are going to need to know about you. So, for instance, the accounting department needs to have some information about you,
right,
in order to pay you. Our risk and compliance department and contracts department are going to do some due diligence on you. And it could be that there are other organizations, if you're going to touch our IT system, that I need to put you in touch with IT. So that's what we meant by internal stakeholders, the fact that depending on what business you're doing with a third party, there are going to be multiple entities within your corporation who need to have access to information about that third party in order for you to be successful in what you're doing with them. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. One of the things you mentioned in the interview in the Compliance Week magazine article were the need and requirement for policies and procedures. Well, I think I have a good understanding of why that's important in the anti-corruption world. If you could maybe expand upon that, but also go back to the data breach example. How would policies and procedures in conjunction with a third-party management tool like Hyperos help a company manage that risk?
So as we engage with a corporation, what we find is that the majority of corporations have spent a lot of time, done a lot of work, put an awful lot of thought into their policies and procedures around third parties in general, around different types of third parties, around security, around anti-bribery, anti-corruption, and on and on and on and on. The challenge that we find is that, again, we're talking about larger organizations here, where, you're working with 100 third parties. That's fine. You have enough employees internally that they can manage the different types of information that needs to be collected, that needs to be managed and so forth around that third party. As I just said, for the onboarding process, I know who Tom is. Do I have him in my AP system? Has IT spoken with him? And on and on and on. The challenge is in the larger organization. If you think about a typical process, from onboarding through due diligence, through the contracting process, through to after contracting, the ongoing due diligence, performance management, through termination. In the case of some of our customers, as I look at them, they are managing maybe 50 different elements of risk, multiple elements of performance around different third parties. And they have thousands of them, tens of thousands of third parties. And they have more third parties than they have employees within their organization. And so with the best will in the world, unless you're going to be employing armies of people who are manually going to be ensuring that your hard sought after policies and procedures that you've spent a huge amount of time thinking about and trying to make part of the fabric of your organization, how do you match the two? Just from a pure numbers perspective, it doesn't work. And that's where we believe technology can play a big part and be extremely valuable to an organization to make sure that your policies and procedures are actually being followed within your organization and externally through your third parties.
Now, would the same be true for an appropriate level of internal controls within a company?
Absolutely. So internal controls, are you talking about it in terms of making sure that your internal employees are following your correct procedures in terms of how they're managing your third parties?
Well, that would be sort of question A, but question B would be to move the internal controls over to the third parties to make sure the third parties are following the company policies and procedures to the extent they apply.
Yes, totally. So that's exactly what I'm talking about. So again, thinking about an example regarding bribery and corruption, as you have engaged the third party, part of your contract, for instance, is that I contract with you on the basis that you accept these particular contract clauses, that you're going to accept my code of conduct, that you're going to accept training, that you're going to accept audit. Again, I think the challenge, and it's a conversation that you and I have had, is that companies may be doing a good job of the initial due diligence of putting the contract in place, and then what happens to the contract, and who's making sure that those hard fought after clauses in the contract are actually being followed through, that you have the documents and the rights that you've asked for in the contract, and also that the people, that your team internally are following what you're asking them to do. Fine with a smaller organization, extremely difficult with a large organization, particularly in multinational companies, we find.
I often tell people that the easy part is up to the point of contract signing, and the hard part is managing it thereafter. And it sounds like that one of the things that you and the Hypero solution can do is help companies manage that relationship after the contract is signed.
That's correct. We look at a third party in terms of the entire life cycle of the third party, again, from the initial, even, way before you've agreed to do business with them, just the registration process, right through the due diligence, the contracting, the ongoing monitoring, and the ability, not to steal a Tom Fox copyrighted phrase, but document. I don't have to tell you is so important. The challenge again for an organization is, what does that actually look like from a daily basis? Fine with a small group of third parties, but when you're trying to do that with thousands of third parties, where you have multiple individuals, maybe in different geographies, that need to weigh in on a third party and then document, this is my reason for doing business with them, this is, I've looked at the due diligence, this is what I think about the contract, I am doing the ongoing due diligence, I have gone and done the training, and you're documenting that. Again, without technology, we find that for organizations, this becomes extremely difficult.
Marie, we're near the end of our time. I was wondering if you would be willing to share, if someone wanted to find out more about Hyperos, how would they do that? And if they wanted to follow up with you, how would they get in contact with you?
So if you're interested in finding out more about Hyperos, I recommend that you go to our website, which is www.hyperos.com. And if you'd like to get in touch with me, you can get in touch with me at solutions@hyperos.com.
Marie, I really appreciate you taking the time to visit with us today. It's been most informative. I really appreciate your example of the data breach, because I think that's something that generally compliance practitioners think about anti-corruption risk very well, but perhaps not other risks, and it's certainly relevant given what happened over the holiday season. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for attending. My name is Tom Fox. If you'd like to visit with me or have any questions about this episode, you can reach me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. Thanks a lot, Marie, and we'll look forward to visiting with you again.
Thanks so much, Tom.